All right, everyone. What we're going to be doing today is going over the retirement and investment planning presentation seminar that was the monthly presentation for the month of March. So this is going to be the recording. So hopefully this is just something you were there live and you're looking at the review at this point in time. But there's a couple things I want to really focus on with this presentation specifically. Primarily, I want to look at some questions you need to be able to answer if you are starting to build a retirement plan. And then within those questions, how the investment management side of that fits into your retirement plan. This is not going to be a video that goes into extreme detail from an investment management standpoint. We are going to really look from an investment management standpoint at a pretty 30,000 foot view from that standpoint and how it fits into retirement planning. It's really going to be centered around that retirement planning subject. So just to give you kind of an idea of what to expect going forward into this presentation. So naturally, we're going to start off with retirement planning, kind of jumping off to this. So I want to go ahead and look at the first question here, which is what do you plan or when do you plan to retire? Not what do you plan to retire. When do you plan to retire? So this is a question that seems really easy, but can get a little bit tricky when you really start to think about it, because there's a couple key points you really need to make sure you're aware of. So first off, do you plan to retire prior to 59 and a half? So when you have an IRA or when you have a Roth IRA, traditionally you are looking at not being able to withdraw out of that account in most cases prior to 59 and a half without getting a 10% penalty. So if you are looking to retire before 59 and a half, and that is one of your goals, you need to make sure you are using an account that is not restricted to post 59 and a half withdrawals. And so that looks at a taxable account. That looks in some situations a 457 if you have access to that, some situations a 401k, but you need to make sure you are taking into account that age if you want to retire early. The next two kind of go hand in hand with, do you plan to work part-time, and when do you plan on taking Social Security? So do you see yourself working part-time between when you retire and when you start taking Social Security? Do you see yourself taking Social Security prior to your full retirement age, or do you see yourself waiting until maybe age 67 or 70 to take Social Security? Those are really going to play key factors in what you need to think about, because if you end up working part-time and say you pull Social Security early, you can actually see your Social Security check get deducted based on how much you are earning from that part-time position. So you really need to make sure you're planning well for that so that you can bridge the gap between retirement and when you actually pull from your investment accounts, and then when you actually pull from Social Security, all really, really well. And there can be a few year gap between that retirement date and that Social Security date that you need to start planning for either IRA withdrawals, 401k withdrawals, part-time work, whatever that might be. So just keep both of those questions in mind. And then healthcare costs. So if you are a Forsyth County employee and you meet a few different requirements, so either one, you've been with the county for at least 5 years and you retire after the age of 60, or between your age and your years of service equals 75. So if you meet either one of those, you qualify to take your health care with you when you leave employment, at least until you either hit Medicare or until you get a second position where you also would have health insurance at that point. If you don't have that, however, you do not meet either one of those requirements, then what you need to make sure is you are planning for healthcare costs if you retire prior to 65. So when I say healthcare costs, you can look anywhere from possibly $600 to $1,200 a month for an individual for healthcare costs. So you need to make sure you're taking into account what those potential costs would be prior to jumping on the Medicare, and then also thinking about Medicare and its cost as well, because it is not an entirely free system either. So, kind of what I was talking about early, I want to show this chart. So, this chart is kind of an all encompassing of someone retiring at age 62 and then living through husband and wife living through 90 and 94 at this point. So what we're looking at is in green right here is that last part year of work. In orange is going to be what you see them living on outside of Social Security. Social Security is going to be purple. So when we say outside of Social Security, what we're really talking about is the dollar amount that they're needing to pull out of their retirement or investment accounts to maintain their lifestyle. So when we go back here and we talk about this question of retiring prior to Social Security, working part time, what we're really looking at is if we wait until full retirement age to pull Social Security in your later 60s, or if we wait till 70 to pull Social Security, do you have enough in assets to bridge this gap so that you can live with the quality of life you want to live in those early years of retirement and do that in a way that is responsible and functional? If you cannot do that, that is where we have to start working on adjusting your retirement age or adjusting one of the other questions we're going to get to in a second. But I like to at least show this to kind of really show you what that gap we were talking about would look like. Now, when we talk about Social Security, you could do a whole presentation on Social Security just by itself. It can get really hairy and really in the weeds very, very quickly. What I primarily want to focus on is this bottom kind of section right here. So, for pretty much most people born after 1960, which is well, everyone born after 1960, but for the people that were born prior to that, most are already taking Social Security. So most people building up to Social Security are born after 1960. You're looking at full retirement age being 67, which means you get 100% of your earned benefit if you take Social Security at age 67. However, if you do not take Social Security until age 70, you can get up to 124%. But in turn, if you take Social Security at age 62, you're only looking at about 70% of your estimated earned benefit. So you see about a 6% drop every single year between 67 and 62, and about an 8% increase from 67 to 70 if you were to wait. So when you're talking about Social Security, and like I said, again, you're looking at that gap, and when you want to retire, you need to be looking at, all right, well, is it something I can wait to take? Is it something I can wait till age 70 to take? Is it something that I really need to probably take earlier at 62? So when we look at this, we can kind of look at it somewhere around this line. So this is the same person. Let's call them Greg for all intensive purposes of this scenario. So Greg has three options. And again, you can take Social Security anytime between 62 and 67 or 67 and 70. But for this scenario, we're really looking at the extreme. So either the earliest you can take it at 62, the latest you can take it at 70, or taking it at full retirement age of 67 for Greg here. So if Greg takes Social Security at 62, his monthly payout will be $2,500. If he takes it at full retirement, it'll be $3,600. So that's his 100% benefit at that point. And if he takes it at 70, it'll be $4,500. Now, we talked about kind of that gap between when you retire, but you also need to think about longevity. Like, how long do people in your family typically live? Like, what's the average age? How healthy are you? Do you have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's that runs in your family? Is there a situation where you see yourself living really long? What does that look like? So, if you see that you typically have a lot of family members that really don't make it past the mid to early 70s, you probably want to look at maybe pulling a little bit sooner, closer to that 62 age. So, what you can see here is it's a lower dollar amount, but you really need to live past 77 for it to break even with this full retirement age at this point. Like, you need to hit 77 to really get the most out of that 62. If you live longer than 77, so if you're looking at pulling full retirement at 67, you live past 77, you start to work out better. So it's 77 and you pull at 62, by 77, you're getting about $547,000. By 77, if you pull at 67, you're getting 551,000 total dollars paid out to you. So that's the break even you need to live to in order to really make the most out of Social Security by waiting. Now, if you wait till 70, you need to live into your 80s. At that point, you need to live into your early 80s to really get the most out of Social Security at that point. So, what I typically tell people is this plays into it. But again, if you have longevity that reaches into your 80s, historically, your family history, people tend to live into their later 80s and they tend to be fairly healthy, and you in turn are fairly healthy. Excuse me. The conversation then becomes, do you probably want to wait at least until full retirement? But if you can, maybe 70 is a little bit better. Or between you and your spouse, one of you take it maybe like 65, 67, and the other one waits till 70, just depending on what that would look like. So there's a lot of ways you can really customize and optimize that Social Security benefit. It's just a matter of making sure it fits into the rest of your plan. Now, how much will you spend in retirement? So, what does that retirement spending goal actually look like for you? And I tend to tell people to think about this in terms of, guys, and this is about to switch slides. So, let me jump back real quick. This is what I typically tell people to think of in terms of a month. So and I say a month because most people budget for a month during their working lives. If you budget by quarter, if you budget by week, you can think about it in a week, but month's usually a pretty good one. In most calculators you'll see out there of retirement planning softwares usually base everything on months when it comes to spending goals at that point. You'll have some annual, but ideally, yeah. So some questions you need to think about. So, what is your monthly income need? So, really, the way you need to think about that question is going to be, how much do you spend a month right now? And think about how much you spend a month right now comfortably. So, don't think of it as just from groceries. Don't think of it as just utilities, bills, car payment, anything like that. You want to tack on clothing purchases, you want to tack on entertainment, you want to tack on clothes, going out, whatever it might be. You want to make sure you are planning for a income need that is going to be how you would like to live or comfortably live now. So if you comfortably spend $5,000 a month, or you comfortably spend $6,000 a month, you don't, and that includes restaurants and everything, don't plan for your core expenses that might only be $3,500, because that's not the lifestyle you want to live in retirement. You want to plan for the lifestyle that either maintains status quo or go a little bit higher. So first off, you need to know what you spend right now, which means if you don't already have like a budget, or if you don't, and not even a budget, if you just at least track your expenses, if you don't already have a decent idea of what that number is, get it, because that's going to be one of the big starting points. Like, so you're thinking about, all right, when do I want to retire? So that's the first thing. And now we're looking at, all right, well, how much do I need to spend once I retire? So get that. Next, you want to look at your goals. And I usually say vacations and hobbies are like the two big ones. So vacations being, all right, well, we want to necessarily say, well, if your monthly living expenses are $4,500, well, is that taking into account a vacation? If not, we need to plan for vacations on top of that. So, I mean, are we looking at $8,000 a year for vacations, $15,000 a year for vacations, $30,000 a year for vacations? I don't know what you'd want to do, but you need to start looking at what you necessarily want that to be if travel is going to be one of the things you would like to do in retirement, which I'd say most people have that as a retirement goal at that point. Then we need to look at hobbies. I always kind of joke because I particularly personally do not have, I'd say, quote unquote, a lot of hobbies. Like I have my shows that my wife and I watch, and then we have like, I walk my dog every now and again, and I work. Those are kind of the big things that I try to say take up a bulk of my time. I don't fish or fix up old cars or anything like that. So I always find you either have people that are like, oh, very, very hobby driven, or they're like, hobbies. Is that what people do with free time? Let me tell you what mine would be when I get some free time. So, but I say that to say, if there's something you would like, and even if it's, oh, I just watch my shows, or I play video games, or I hunt, or I fish, or I fix up old cars, you need to plan for expenses related to those. So if it's like you hunt and fish, and this is something, again, not my hobby. I don't really know what goes into it. I imagine there are costs as far as licensings, renting land, buying new equipment. You need to make sure you're accounting for that on an annual basis. So giving yourself essentially a hobby allowance. If you fix up old cars, you need to make sure you can plan for purchasing the car, or buying parts for the car, tools for the car at that point in time. If you just play video games or watch TV, I mean, are you going to want to upgrade your couch every few years, upgrade your TV every so often, surround sound at that point? Usually I have a lot more specific examples around that one, so it makes it a little bit easier. But I mean, thinking about that, you want to make sure you're planning for those things, because again, ideally, what we're looking at, we're not looking at retirement from the standpoint of can I survive and get by in retirement. We want to think about retirement as like, how can I plan to thrive and enjoy my retirement as much as possible? And that's really what we want to get to. So the next thing, like major expenses, are going to be home repair, car purchases. Do you have home repairs? Do you have car purchases baked in? I mean, realistically, retirement might be 25 to 35 years for you. So realistically, you're probably going to need a car at some point in time. Your AC unit is probably going to go out. Your hot water heater is probably going to go out. You're probably going to need a roof repair. Do you have those larger costs that you aren't going to be able to cash flow with a working income at that point baked into your plan, so that you can go through that and pay one of those off and feel comfortable that it's not a surprise into your plan? The next is healthcare expenses. This could be long-term care expenses. This could be adult daycare expenses. This could be in-home healthcare. This could be just Medicare expenses, dental, vision. If you know you have something that is expensive, either medication on an ongoing basis, make sure you're planning for that. But it's going to be general healthcare expenses. So you need to make sure, outside again of your monthly enjoyment living expenses, your vacation, your hobbies, your home repair, your car purchase, you're also planning for medical expenses. And this is where it's extremely important to kind of start thinking and planning for this, because this might dictate what that working year is too. Like, all of these questions are going to work together. So, I mean, you're going to have retirement age and how much you spend. They go hand in hand in seeing what a plan successfully can do. So, I mean, one thing with spending, I will say you typically see spending tiered down in retirement. So, like, for example, you normally peak spending in your late 40s, early 50s, and naturally people just tend to spend a little bit less as they go into retirement. So you typically still see a decent amount of spending in your early and mid 60s. But you get into your late 70s and that's going to drop down. Healthcare is going to pick back up, but you're typically going to see spending tear down. Now, what's not going to tear down is your medical expenses. So I've kind of said medical, I've referenced Medicare before. So if you look at an average individual in 2023, their average all in medical costs for Medicare is about $516 a month. At that point, that's 2023. Now, some people don't have that big of an expense. Some people are closer to 250, 300, 400. It's really going to depend on what coverage you have, what premiums, what packages you do throughout Medicare. But national average is going to be about 516. You take that and you inflate it up to age 95. So someone that's 65, inflate that up to their 95. I mean, you're looking at possibly like $1,300 to $1,400 a month in Medicare expenses alone. So we come back over here and we say, all right, we're planning for healthcare expenses, we're planning for vacation. You also need to make sure you're taking into account inflation's a real thing, and you need to make sure you're taking into account all of those expenses growing over time, especially if you're a few years out from retirement or 10 to 15 years out from retirement. You need to make sure you're not planning that, say, $4,500 as the first year and then kicking on retirement. You need to plan what $4,500 today is, inflate that up. So that might be $6,000 by the time you actually hit retirement, and that might be $9,000 by the time you get later into retirement. So make sure you're taking into account what that cost would be. Next thing you're going to look at is long-term care expenses. So I kind of mentioned this. These get really expensive, and a lot of people say, oh, well, do I need long-term care insurance? Right now, in most cases, if you can afford to pay for a long-term care policy, you can typically afford to self-insure yourself at that point. Usually you see that long-term care policies are so expensive that you really need to have a large large amount of assets to be able to cover the cost of that long-term care. And in most of those cases, if you have the asset base to do that, you can cover the actual expense yourself without needing the long-term care insurance. Now, how much do I need to save? Like, how much do you need to have saved for retirement? So, this is again, it's going to build off of how much do I need to live on? Like, how much do I want to spend? What year do I want to retire? So, what's my retirement age? Then it's like, all right, well, we have those two. Now, how much do I need to save between now and then to make that a reality, if that can be a reality? So, you're typically going to have two sources: Social Security and retirement in my face. No, I'm just kidding. You're going to have retirement and retirement savings at that point in time. Those are typically the two avenues we see for most people. Most people don't have a pension anymore, so it's really going to be Social Security and retirement savings. So, what you're typically looking at, and I always like to say this, and it's going to jump back here, is Social Security being the first of those two pillars is not designed to fully replace your income. Social Security is designed to be a supplement to your income when you retire, or a portion of your income when you retire. So, what this chart's looking at is the percentage of your income that Social Security will replace, and the percentage of your income that you need to be on the hook for with retirement savings. And what you'll notice here is the more you make during your working career, the less that Social Security percentage is actually going to cover. So if you make $30,000 a year and you've used to $30,000 a year, you want to live on that same lifestyle equivalent, well, Social Security is going to cover probably somewhere between 70-75% of your living expenses. But you're still on the hook for about 25% of them. At that point, if you're making $100,000, well, you can expect Social Security to maybe only cover 40-ish, 44 to 45% of your living expenses at that point in time, and that puts 40 to 45% of those living expenses on to you. We're assuming kind of some of your expenses drop off, like you're not commuting to work, you're not buying business clothes, whatever that might be. So you're not going to have the exact same, but to maintain a typical quality of life, and your taxes will typically be lower in retirement. But I say this to say that when you look at Social Security, it is a progressive system. So it is heavier weighted to lower income individuals. So you need to make sure, if you are making really like 80, 90, 100, 150,000, 200,000, that you are putting enough money away to cover a large portion of those living expenses for you in retirement, because Social Security is just not going to stretch nearly as far as it would for someone at a lower income level. Next, you need to make sure, and I'm going to move myself here real quick, guys, and then click over. You need to make sure you are saving enough from the retirement savings side, so retirement savings pillar, to where your withdrawal rate, so the percentage of that account value that you pull out on an annual basis, can be as close to 4% as possible over time. And I say this, and I want to kind of show you this chart right here. It's like 4% is a very big rule of thumb at this point for like a balanced retirement portfolio. It can change on everyone's situation, and you can do things to kind of maneuver around it. It is a good rule to try and base around. It's because what you're looking at here is, if someone has $1 million portfolio and they're pulling 6% or 6%, we're assuming kind of 80th percentile here. So like pretty decent across the board. You're looking at that money probably lasting somewhere between like 20 and 23 years. If they're pulling 5% a year out of that portfolio, probably like closer to like 28, 29 years. If you're looking at 4%, you can see that probably lasts somewhere around 30, 35 plus at that point. So you have a decent amount of wiggle room. Now, that doesn't need to be a steady state 4%. That can fluctuate, where some years are 7, some years are 2. You really just want to hit kind of averages on that and be fairly close. But you need to kind of think about that withdrawal rate and what you're looking at as far as what you want to spend in retirement. Then you're starting to get a pretty idea of, all right, well, how much do I need to have saved if I need to generate X dollars a month, X for vacation, X for my hobbies, X for healthcare, home repairs, car purchases, and I know Social Security estimates are going to have me at this dollar amount a month, that really starts to push how much you actually need to have saved in order to get close to that 4% level. Now, when we talk about that savings amount and we look back at this 4% level, we're really talking about having your money make it. So when we're talking about that 4% level, we're talking about you having enough money to get through retirement. Now, this is where you also need to think about what are your goals for your assets when you die and what are your goals for retirement. So there's really kind of three big goals you typically have in retirement: increasing wealth, preserving principal, and spending. So I typically say increasing wealth and green up here. This is going to be legacy. If your goal is to die with more money than you retired with, you want to leave a legacy to your children. You want to start thinking about generational wealth at that point. You want to be up here. So you necessarily don't want to look at that 4% rule as, oh, I'm going to pull 4% and try and get as much out of my accounts as possible. You really want to probably look at pulling sub 4%, like 3-2% at that point. So those accounts can really grow. Then you have where I'd say probably most people fit in is this preservation. So this is going to be your goal: stability. Like you have worked a long time and you are really, really used to adding money to your retirement accounts. You're used to seeing those account values grow over time and you want stability in your plan. It's going to be very, very hard for you to stomach seeing your money be spent down, but you also don't necessarily want to see it grow a ton. You just want to have stability. So I always say with this scenario, if you retired with around $1 million, you would ideally like to pass away with maybe between a few $100,000 difference of $1 million. So like maybe 1.2 to 800,000, somewhere around there. But this is typically for people that just they're going to have the most enjoyment out of retirement if they don't necessarily see their assets spend down that much, and they want that stability factor. The last two, the blue lines down at the bottom here, the spending lines. If you want to plan for your last check to bounce, but you want to do it responsibly, that's where you're typically looking at this. So I always say it kind of looking here. This is where you want to say, all right, I want to see my assets spend down. I'm fine with that. I want to get as close as I can. I want to utilize as much of my retirement savings as possible, but I still want to make sure that I have enough. I don't want to run out of money 10 years short. I don't want to run out of money 5 years short. I want to be responsible with it. This is where that 4% comes into play kind of the most right here. These two up here, you're not necessarily looking at that 4% that much. Down here, you are at that point. So now, with this in mind, looking at this next chart right here, so this is if you were to meet with us, we use a software called Right Capital. It is a planning software. It generates essentially a plan score for you, a probability score. So if you were to meet with us, what's going to happen is it'll generate a probability of success. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds in this or this chart behind it that much. I just want to talk about this probability of success right now and kind of say there's 90 to 100, 80 to 90, 70 to 79, and 60 to 69. And then you have sub 60%. I want to use those percentages in terms of this chart right here because this is where it's going to kind of matter. So when we look at planning and we look at planning within the way our software works, really anything 60% or higher is fairly positive. It's not, and that's why I always say I like to explain it because it's not necessarily a grade score where a 60 is a D if you ever had a D and it wasn't just failing for you. But 60 to 69%, you're planning for this kind of spending goal. 70 to 79%, you're planning for stability. And then 80 to 100%, you want your wealth to grow at that point. So I always like to define it in terms of if you were to meet with us, what that would look like and just kind of what it would shift. But this is really going to be dependent on how much you need to save, again, in order to how you're going to withdraw from that account. Now, the last question we're going to talk about is how should you invest your money to last? So how should you invest your money to essentially build up to retirement? And then how should you invest your money throughout retirement? And again, we're not going to get very much in the weeds here. We are really going to take a 30,000 foot view from an investment standpoint. So, I mean, first and foremost, you need to be invested. So, a lot of people will lean very, very heavy into cash when they retire, or they'll just naturally lean heavy into cash, are more conservative individuals. But one of the guarantees with cash at this point is inflation will lower your purchasing power. So, what this chart shows is essentially what a dollar is worth in 1913, and then what that same dollar is worth in 2019. So, it's pennies on the dollar at that point, and you will just see this continue and continue and continue and continue. If you hold too much cash for too long, that cash is going to lose purchasing power for you. So you need to make sure you are at least investing in some way, shape, or form for your assets to grow, your money to compound, your money to build on itself, and not keep it all in cash, because you are never going to be able to save enough in cash to be able to fund your retirement. It's just not going to happen. You need to be able to see that money grow and kind of work for you over time. And that's going to be kind of the first point, just making sure you actually are invested. Now, that means you're going to have to take on risk. So I'm going to kind of move my head over here a little bit. So there is going to be risk involved. So what this chart shows is risk for a stock portfolio, a bond portfolio, or a 50-50 portfolio. And it's going to show for a rolling 1 year, rolling 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, the stock market's really risky. Bonds are really risky. I don't want to risk any of my money. Now, in turn, cash is really, really safe. Well, cash is safe for, I don't know, under 3-5 years. But you go 5, 10, 15, 20 years, cash becomes less and less valuable and more risky, because you're almost locking in an underperformance. You're locking in a loss on that long period of time. And it's kind of the opposite when you look at stocks and bonds. So, on a 1 year from 1950 to 2022, the worst year we've ever had for stocks, which was 2008, was down 39%. The best year we had was up 47%. Bonds, worst year was down 13, best year was up 43. For a 50-50 portfolio, worst year was down 15, best year was up 33%. We go rolling 5 years. So when we talk about rolling, I want to explain this real quick too. As like, so if we do 1 year, it's 1950, 1951. If we do rolling 5 years, 1950, 1955, 1951, 1956, 1952, 1957. So it's like every 5 year section, not like 1950 to 1955, but it's every single like rolling year. Same for 10 and 20. So worst 5 year period has been down -3 for stocks. Best has been up 28%. Worst fixed income, so bonds, has been down -2. And a 50-50 portfolio in that time period, we have not had a rolling 5 years that had negative returns. We go rolling 10 years. You have seen negative returns in equities at a point in time. We've never had it in bonds. Our worst return for 50-50s, 2%. We go rolling 20 years. The worst return we've ever had on a rolling 20-year period for the for stocks is going to be 6%. Highest is going to be 17. For a 50-50 portfolio, 5% and 14. For bonds, 1% and 12. So you take that and you say, all right, well, if I see cash is going to always lose over a 20-year period of time, I need to have something where my money is actually growing, and we need to make sure we're looking at that. So you see kind of average annual return over this time for stocks has been 11%, bonds has been 5%, a 50-50 portfolio has been 8.5%. So you need to invest in something. Stocks and bonds are probably the easiest inside of your 401k. Now, when you're looking at that, that's kind of for growth. Now, for in retirement, if we look again, $100,000 portfolio with that 4% withdrawal rate, you're going to want to make sure you're not being too risky, but also not too conservative when you're taking income in retirement. So we have 3 scenarios here. We have an account that's really risky from 2000 to, and I'll lower myself here, from 2000 to 2018. So the really risky portfolio goes through the dot-com bubble. You lose a lot in the dot-com bubble. You get a little bit of a recovery right here, goes through 2008, but you've already lost so much that you're still taking income out. You just don't have enough in assets to ever really recover. So over that period of time, your 100,000 goes to 22,000. If you go really conservative, you see you don't really have that big of a drop in the dot-com bubble. You don't really have a drop at all in 2008, but you also never see your account value grow. So you still end up kind of ending with the worst case scenario by being the most conservative. So again, this is kind of the cash conversation again. Then you go like kind of a happy blend. So, like a balanced portfolio where you still see loss, but you have a recovery. You still see loss, but it's not lost to the point where you can't overcome it. So, you see a little bit more stability in that portfolio. So, you really have to look at investing in a terms of risk and reward, and then what you can take on in risk and what that does for you in retirement. Because the more risk isn't always necessarily better, and the less risk isn't always necessarily better, because it might be a lot of risk for a huge reward, but the risk isn't worth it, or not enough for risk for no reward, which isn't worth it. So you really need to find a balance in retirement, and that balance is going to be slightly different depending on what your situation looks like. It might be this well constructed probably balanced portfolio here for some people. It might be closer to like a 50-50 portfolio or 70-30 portfolio for other people. So it's just going to be kind of differentiator. Now, the reason you want to find that balance though is because when you lose value, it doesn't take the same amount of value to get back to break even. So if you have $1 and it drops by 50%, well, you have 50 cents. Well, you need that 50 cents to have 100% return to get back to $1. So if it just had a 50% return to get back, well, that's 75 cents at that point, and you're still losing. So you want to make sure you're protecting yourself on the downside, because you don't want to have to work as hard to get back to break even. So rather than a 50% loss like we might see here, at this point, you want to say, well, can I lock that down to just maybe a 30% loss? And then I only have to go up by 43% rather than 100. So you need to take risk, but you need to really make sure you're not taking too much risk at that point. Next, you can kind of think of a pretty common strategy is what's kind of called a bucket strategy at that point, where you have in your retirement portfolio assets that are geared towards long term, assets that are geared towards midterm, and assets that are geared towards short term. So this is like your later, like think about this like your 80s in retirement, your 70s in retirement, and like your 60s in retirement. So like you're retiring in your 60s, this is what you're going to spend pretty soon. This is what you're probably going to be spending in your 70s. This is probably going to be what you're spending in your 80s, but this needs to grow. This needs to kind of grow and refill up this bucket, and this bucket needs to be stable so you can spend it. And think of it kind of in sections like that. And that can be all done in the same account, but that's going to be kind of really what you're shooting for. Now, this is a super busy chart, so I want to kind of just focus on a few things. We're looking back again at the way you're invested at top. So like really, really conservative to very risky. And then the percent you're taking out. So that withdrawal rate. So again, we're looking at risk on here, withdrawal rate down here. So if you're taking 3% or less, it doesn't matter across the board. You're seeing your wealth grow. So if you're taking 3% or less, you are really looking at yourself being up here. So you're seeing your wealth increase. It's you get to that 4% level, you're starting to see yourself spend those assets down. And that's where you get too conservative and it can hurt you. So you want to start leaning a little bit more aggressive. If you need to start taking 5, 6, 7%, you really need to start leaning to these more aggressive portfolios, because yes, it's risky, but you need some of that risk in your plan in order to sustain. So but comfortably, you really want to be looking at that 4-ish level where you see those higher probabilities there. You jump into the 5, there's still some pretty decent numbers in there, but again, just reinforcing that 4% kind of mentality at that point. Now, I want to show you some examples of different cases with different withdrawal rates. And so you go Han and Leia Solo. They retire at 65 from fighting for the rebellion. If any of you guys are Star Wars fans, this would make sense. If you're not Star Wars fans, I apologize for the cheesy Star Wars related jokes at that point. And go watch Star Wars. It's I'd say that's probably my most controversial take. It's a fairly decent franchise. I think it's a little overrated at times, but again, not the situation to talk about it. So, but they retire at 65. They have a 6% withdrawal rate, and they have Social Security coming in at $4,300 a month. So they're sitting at a little over $600,000 in assets. With that 6% withdrawal rate, you see that asset base gets them to around about their probably mid 80s, like 84, 85 at that point in time. If we go to same situation, but we do and I'm going to move myself over here real quick, but we do a 5% withdrawal rate here. So we're looking at, again, retire at 65, 4,300 in retire or in Social Security, same asset base. You're looking at late 80s at that point. We do a 4% withdrawal rate. Now they're making it through long-term care, and they're making it to their mid to late 90s at that point. So they're seeing their like early 90s hit at that point. Again, same scenario, just a slightly lower withdrawal rate. You can really see that money last a good bit longer. So all this being said, I want to reinforce these questions. So, can you answer the 4 questions we have really talked about? When do you want to retire? How much do you want to spend in retirement? How much do you need to have saved to meet those goals in retirement? And then, how should you invest your money to last in retirement and build to retirement? If you cannot answer those 4 questions, you need to sit down with a planner and you need to work those out. And this is someone that has a small amount in assets all the way up to someone that has millions of dollars in assets, because you can have millions of dollars and a massive income base and spend a ton of money and not be as secure as you actually think you are. And you can also not have a ton of assets, but have a much more modest lifestyle and be a lot more secure than you think you are. So this isn't to say you hit a threshold in income or you hit a threshold in net worth and these no longer become applicable to you. What this really is no matter what your net worth is, no matter what your asset base is, no matter what your income or spending are, you need to know what the answer to each one of these questions is for you specifically, and how to implement that into a plan and into a strategy. So I really, really encourage you, if you don't have answers to these questions, or if you've never thought about answering these questions, to start thinking about it, start developing kind of what you would like to see the answer to those be, and then sit down and meet with a planner so you can really build out a full plan and know that you are going into retirement really, really securely. And I also would encourage you, if you are already using a advisor and you have only ever talked about investments or mutual funds or insurance, and they have never done a in-depth plan for you, you've never talked about when you'd like to retire, what your spending will look like in retirement, you've never talked about Medicare expenses, Social Security optimization, random expenses, they can't really give you a clear year by year outlook on that. You've never talked about how much you need to spend, how much you need to save, what those investment strategies look like both pre and post retirement, in the context of that larger plan. You're probably not working with a planner. You're probably working with either a broker or an insurance agent that is just calling themselves a financial advisor because it's a catch all title. Make sure you're working with a planner, and make sure there's someone that is working in your best interest, and make sure it's someone that's able to craft a plan that can answer these questions, because ultimately this is the goal of working. We're working to kind of have some fulfillment in life, but we're also working to eventually be able to stop working, ideally at that point in time, or be able to stop working if we wanted to stop working is maybe a better way to phrase it. But you need to make sure. So again, for county employees, so for Forsyth County eligible employees, you can reach out to me to set up a meeting at my retirement plan, investplanadvise.com, or that is my phone number. If it's someone that you're just found this video and you are not a Forsyth County employee, but you would like to reach out to our firm, our contact information is on our website, which is investplanadvise.com. Feel free to check us out there. We also have more videos about various planning topics on there as well. But thank you for listening to me for such a long time, if you did listen to all of this, and hope you have a great day.